Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go Mountaineers. Dub V at 5:30 p.m. That's right. Still talking Mountaineers. No Mike Gill. I'm also an alum. But we're back, most importantly. Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Ryan Rothstein alongside Danny Ryan. 2 hours down. We got two right in front of us. Let's get it. We're live at Chickies and Pete's in Atlantic City inside the Tropicana Casino. Josh producing the show back in the studio. And yes, it is Football at 4. Yes, Andrew DiCecco is here to drop some knowledge on us. At Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com. Excited to catch up with our friend, Mr. DiCecco. Andrew, how we doing, man? Hope your holiday was good.
What's up, Brian? Good to be with you, man. Hope your holiday was good as well.
Yeah, man, all good. All good. You know, Eagles won, so it was positive. You wouldn't know it from my tweets and from the first 2 hours of the show, but, you know, it's a win's a win. At least we hope a win is a win. It still looked ugly, but, you know, they did enough to get it done. So before we transition and look ahead to the Cardinals, you know, what's your assessment on what we saw Christmas Day?
Well, it wasn't pretty, but there were stretches where the Eagles showed you some sort of rhythm offensively and defensively. As we talked about last week, I'm not sure what they anticipated getting out of the switch from Sean Desai and Matt Patricia, because the personnel is the personnel. You're not necessarily going to see a vast difference from productivity just because they have a lot of players there that don't necessarily that are what they are. They're not necessarily adept at doing what the Eagles would like for them to do. So that's why you saw some leaky coverage and some untimely pass rush from the Eagles, which has been problematic all season long. But offensively, early on, they looked like they were finding their stride, and then they sort of continue to revert back to the offense that we saw for much of the season.
Yeah, it did have more of a balance to it. You know, yes, there was run the ball chance at the link, but, you know, DeAndre Swift, 20 carries. I think they finished with 35 rushing attempts for the game. So, you know, more of that concerted effort to run the ball, establish the run, have more of a balance, be less predictable. I mean, did you like what you saw from that point of view, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I've talked with Mike about this every Thursday when we speak, is that I don't believe that the Eagles can't run the ball. I just thought that they lacked a willingness to commit to it. And they have the players that are able to do it. Now, they don't have that between the tackles bruiser, which a lot of teams that are adept at running the ball have. They do have one in Rashad Penny, but he doesn't play. But I think that they have a healthy rotation of running backs on game day, enough so where they should be able to generate some sort of a ground presence, I would say. And you see a DeAndre Swift. I thought that they did a nice job working him and Kenny Gainwell in tandem. Swift looks pretty fresh at this point in the season. He's on pace. He's 12 yards away from 1,000 yards. He's on pace for his most prolific season as a pro. Actually, he already shattered his best season, but he looks a lot more fresh, and the Eagles have done a good job of finding ways to minimize his touches and work a rotation around them. So in the fourth quarter, you saw the Eagles really be able to, their offensive line be able to lean and wear down on that Giants defensive line, and you saw DeAndre Swift be able to hit the hole and make some big plays. He's obviously has a tremendous burst, and then you saw Kenny Gainwell had a nice 22-yard run in that game as well. So they do have an interesting group of running backs, and I'm interested to see if that was just a byproduct of the game plan, or if that's something that they're going to continue to implement moving forward.
Andrew, I want to ask you about Nick Sirianni's, quote, blow-up on the sideline towards the end of the game, obviously having some words with Hassan Reddick, Devonta Smith stepping in to intervene and just calm things down. Do you put any weight in that? I mean, Sirianni has always been a big personality. He's never afraid to show who he truly is and be passionate. But, I mean, is there any weight in what you saw on the sidelines on Monday? It seems like there's two different sides of how people reacted. Jason Kelsey saying that's what makes him a great coach. That's what makes him a great leader. And then obviously the fans, like the sky is falling every single week, think Nick Sirianni needs to reel it in and stop acting like that on the sideline. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I didn't put too much stock into that, Danny, but I will say that for Nick Sirianni, and he is often animated, but he's never usually like that with his players. He's usually like that to the officials and to even sometimes the opposing sideline. So I thought that given the circumstances, you're seeing some uncharacteristic penalties, some undisciplined play, and I thought that was sort of a coach reaffirming who he is and trying to let everybody know, send a message that, look, this isn't acceptable. He is the head coach at the end of the day, the CEO of this football team, and he needs to make sure that his voice is heard and that there's a certain standard that they talk about every week that they have to make sure that they're living up to. And he can't let one player yell at him, this guy do this guy do that, because then it just becomes chaos. So I thought to a degree it wasn't too troubling there. Now, I will say, going into the locker room after the game, the mood did not quite feel like a win. It was pretty somber, a little tense, you might even say. And, the first thing we see when we walk in is Jalen Hurts talking to Devontae Smith at his locker. Then later on, you see Jason Kelce go over to Jalen Hurts, and he's doing most of the talking. And they're talking over there for a while before Jalen goes to the podium. So there are some things behind the scenes that they need to button up, but I think they're going to obviously work on that internally and not necessarily mention what was the root of that problem. But I think that at this point in the season, maybe you're not living up to expectations, and there's certain things that guys are frustrated with. But ultimately, you won the game. You're 11-4. Everything you want is in front of you. So knowing the leaderships that they have in place is why I'm not necessarily I didn't make too much of it, because I think they'll be able to kind of keep it together and focus on the task at hand.
One more question for you from me, Andrew. Hypothetically, if you had a crystal ball on how this Eagles season was going to pan out, specifically their path to the playoffs and their seeding. Right now, it looks like they're on track for the 2 seed, definitely a shot at the 1 seed if the 49ers can lose to either the Rams or the Commanders. How far, one, do you see this team going in the playoffs? And two, what seed do you see them obtaining by the end of the season?
Great question. So I was asked this a couple weeks ago, and my opinion still hasn't – I'm not wavering from my opinion. I still think they're going to make it to the NFC title game. However, that's where I believe the season stops, and I think that they'll probably end up seizing the 2 seed. But if I had to guess, and I think that their season ultimately going to sputter out going against the San Francisco 49ers. Granted, they didn't look particularly well the other night against the Baltimore Ravens, but you can point to any team in the NFL this year that stumbled when they probably shouldn't have. There's not necessarily a dominant team, but I think matchup-wise, Danny, the 49ers are a really difficult matchup for the Eagles defensively, and they throw a lot at them that really put a lot of unique stress on what the Eagles have there from a personnel standpoint. So I really don't like that matchup from the Eagles' perspective, so I think that's where it would ultimately end.
Talking with Andrew DiCecco from Inside the Birds. Give him a follow at Andrew DiCecco. Let's talk Nick Sirianni for a second, right? This is a guy who has just been outstanding since he took over as head coach, a 34-15 overall record in the regular season. You take this team to the Super Bowl, a flawless regular season essentially last year, losing to the Chiefs. 11 wins up to this point this year. But for me, it just feels like he deserves some criticism up to this point. It's an 11-win team, and it sounds crazy. Maybe it is crazy, but I feel like he failed the defense a little bit. I feel like he's failed Brian Johnson. I don't know. I feel like he could have been better up to this point. Is that fair or foul? How do you assess the job that he's done through what is it, week 15 up to this point?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, and I think that eventually all the fingers are going to start pointing in Sirianni's direction if the Eagles continue to trend in a direction that that they're not supposed to be headed in, given the talent that they have and the expectations that they have going into the season. Now, you mentioned the offense, and he's taken full ownership of the offense, saying that his fingerprints are all over it because obviously there's been a lot of outside criticism, and justifiably so in some regards, to Brian Johnson. However, this is Nick Sirianni's offense, and defensively, Sean Desai, to a degree, was his guy, and he took full accountability for making that decision. And to do that so prematurely, especially when Sean Desai had a couple of decent moments, you got to let a coach sort of grow and learn on the job, because as we said, the defense doesn't have a drastically different complexion than it did under Desai that it does under Matt Patricia. So a lot of it's personnel related. So I really do think that Sean Desai was a scapegoat there. So you have to wonder the optics of that move. So there's certain things this season that, that you can look at the head coach as a certain key figure in why the season maybe has gone sideways and not have met expectations.
You talked about going into the locker room and seeing a frustrated Devontae Smith, and we all heard what Smith had to say after the game. A.J. Brown has refused to speak to the media earlier today as well as post-game Monday, right? Like, we all have seen and heard the frustrations. We all have seen this offense, and it's, vanilla form to them, if you will, for lack of a better way to put it. So it's like, what is it? Is it on the players? Is it the coaching staff not being able to implement these changes that need to be inserted, right? Like, what's the problem here, and how easy of a solution is out there? And maybe it's not easy at all, Andrew.
Well, I think both things can be true, right? I think there might be some frustration on the players' end because certain plays aren't being called to accentuate what they do well. Maybe they're getting away from some simplicity, and they're trying to maybe do some things that aren't necessarily in their skill set or in the best interest of the offense. And then also there's probably the accountability piece, and certain players committing egregious penalties. Maybe some players aren't fulfilling their responsibilities adequately enough. So internally there may be some frustration with one another. This is where you really need to lean on your veteran leaders, the Brandon Grahams, the Fletcher Cox, the Jason Kelsey's of the world, and really those locker room pillars, and really just sort of reaffirm who you are as a team and make sure that there's no distractions in the way as you trend towards the playoffs, because anything like that could potentially cause you to stumble when you probably shouldn't. This team is really talented, and you don't want to let the thing that trips you up be something internally that you could have gotten cleaned up now.
Andrew DiCecco inside the Birds. All right, let's look ahead here to this matchup against an old friend, maybe an old foe, some would say, Jonathan Gannon's Arizona Cardinals. Andrew, just give us a key matchup or a couple of key matchups that you've highlighted, and how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, this is going to be pretty interesting because Jonathan Gannon obviously knows the Eagles well, but they know Jonathan Gannon well as also. But Jonathan Gannon's doing some different things defensively, and he's going to have his team playing up for this competition on Sunday, and it'll sort of be a battle of the wits there, I imagine, between Sirianni and Gannon. But look, I mean, they're going to downplay it. Both sides are going to downplay it throughout the week, Ryan. As you know, there's not going to be any bulletin board material available. Not much needs to be said. The way that Gannon left in that sort of fashion, and the Eagles have struggled to replace him. Obviously, they're on their second play caller here defensively in less than a season. So, I mean, his impact was imminent, and I think you're going to see the Eagles look to go out there and prove a point, and based on the way that Gannon left, and you're also going to see Gannon try to play the role of spoiler and try and stick it to the Eagles, and he knows Jalen Hurts really well. So I'm interested to see how this sort of plays out.
Yeah, we all are here. This team right now just feels like wins aren't good enough, which is crazy to say, but we just want to see a little bit more. Maybe we're asking for too much, but should be fun down the stretch. InsideTheBirds.com is going to have you covered every step of the way. Andrew, it's always fun catching up with you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Appreciate you, Ryan. Talk soon, man.